So welcome to the Global Cyber Academy videos on EU GDPR, and with us today we have Carolyn Harrison, who is an EU GDPR practitioner, and we're going to run through some questions with Carolyn. So Carolyn, welcome. We're outside the Houses of Parliament here in London, and a few weeks ago EU GDPR came into being implemented. Now, what is EU GDPR and how is it an improvement on what national countries had in the past in terms of data security?
Well, GDPR stands for the General Data Protection Regulation. It was a culmination of 5 years of the 28 member states deciding on what would be a good set of regulations, laws that could protect individuals across the whole of the EU. We've walked into this culture of big data, and we've almost accepted it's okay to clone, steal, scrape all our personal information.
Right.
But we don't really get much in return for it, and we certainly, as we're seeing in the news today, do not get much protection around that. So one of my stories I like to say is that the internet, most people expect the internet to be free.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, someone has to pay for it. So what we're finding is that legitimate companies, but a lot of fraudulent companies will steal that data and use it as a currency. So they'll steal our data and sell it to the highest bidder, and that's a new form of currency. Yeah. So we needed a whole infrastructure framework to protect us, to educate us as well as to being to be able to look after ourselves better in the digital world.
Now, here we are in London. At the Academy, we've got students based all around the world, students outside of the European Union, we've got students down in Africa, over in the Far East, India, China. They're outside the European Union. What is this module and what has this course got to do with them?
Well, the EU GDPR applies for anybody that happens to be in the EU geographical region. Yeah. So even if you're coming from Africa or from India and you happen to be at Schiphol Airport transiting through to somewhere else, and you happen to go on the Wi-Fi at Schiphol Airport, you would be protected under the EU GDPR.
Okay.
So, but we're finding increasingly that most other countries are looking to the EU and saying, well, do you know what? This is a good set of regulations. Yeah. Why not mirror it in some of our own countries? So we're finding in America, Far East, Middle East, lots of people are saying we may as well join them.
And sort of the copy of the legislation or the bits that are relevant to them.
Yeah, so what does tend to differ is the protection around the individual rights by regions. As we know, there's cultural differences in lots of areas of the world, aren't there? The EU is very strong. So if we look at the differences between what was in the UK, the Data Protection Act 98, versus GDPR, and now it's been put into UK legislation, it's the DPA 2018. Very much it's about protecting the individual rights, strengthening the rights of the individual. So you've seen things like Facebook, Cambridge Analytica. People didn't know really what was really happening. But also the other two things that have been added to existing legislation is around defining the purpose of why you're collecting that information. No longer is it good enough just to say, do you know what, I might need it, so I'm going to collect it and I'm going to keep it in the attic just in case. And the other thing is you are now responsible and accountable for anybody you outsource the data to. So in the past, people thought if they outsource it to an IT company, HR, payroll, that it would be the provider's responsibility to be the guardian of that data. But actually under GDPR, you still have the accountability and liability for that data that you have passed to them.
If I'm a company running, a fleet of aircraft over in Malaysia, or I'm a company running a hotel chain in China, and we have some European customers, and in our marketing we want to contact people in the European Union, and we hold lots of personal data about them. Are we subject to the same rules? How does EU GDPR work for companies that are based outside the EU that trade with EU consumers?
If you want to do business within the European Union with EU citizens, then you need to abide by the EU GDPR. So if you're trading with the country in the EU, you need to have a base and you need to set up an entity that will be responsible for your business within the EU. So if you or the opposite way around, and you're in Europe and you want to share the information with Malaysia, with India, with America, you need to be able to inform people that you're actually sharing that information outside of the EEA countries.
Quite famously over in America, University of Maryland, over here with the University of Greenwich, that's recently filed for data breach. So the thoughts are around that would these companies, because there's public sector or because they are philanthropic in some way, that the various information commissioners would go more easy on them? How do you see that?
No, not necessarily. We know, looking around the world, so like health providers, education providers, notoriously are quite bad at updating their systems,
Right.
patching, and they've been warned repeatedly.
Yeah.
I'm sure most people have heard about the WannaCry
Yeah.
virus that locked down lots of people's systems.
Yeah.
The thing is that why the regulators generally, not just the data protection regulators, but regulators generally are coming down much harder is because these are these mistakes that are done repeatedly.
Yeah.
And therefore they're saying enough's enough.
Okay.
You could actually have done something about this, and you chose not to spend that money
Yeah.
on protecting these individuals. Therefore we need to teach you a lesson, and
Yeah.
we need to actually do that in lots of ways. So it's not just about the punitive financial levies that might be put on, it's also about the ability to actually stop somebody processing.
Yeah.
So actually for some organisations,
Yeah.
so let's say Facebook, for example, rather than give them a big fine, they might actually say that you cannot process or do certain things in the course of your business while we investigate you. Now that's going to hit them much harder than the financial penalty.
Right. And now, talking about, don't want to be too negative in this video, talking about whether the sanctions and the possible penalties. What are the different national approaches? You know, we've got 28 governments in the European
Yes.
Union. We've got national agencies responsible for those territories for implementing EU GDPR. And EU GDPR is ultimately, it's a framework, isn't it? It's a
It is,
regulation.
yeah.
So do you see a big difference between the different countries' approaches?
There
And
are
have you got
some
the proof of that?
difference,
Because
yeah.
you consult different countries
Yes.
in Europe.
So GDPR, in theory, should be adopted into a national legislation for each and every one of those 28 member states, and we're still a member state at the moment,
Yeah.
the UK. And some countries are only just doing that. There are what they call derogations, so there's slight differences between the countries, not huge. But I'll just give you an example. In Denmark, it's different than, say, the UK. In the UK, the data protection legislation only protects living people,
Okay.
not once you're deceased. In Denmark, actually, up to 10 years after the death, you need to protect the data. So there are
Right.
differences like that.
That's a big difference.
They're a big difference. Also, who will actually benefit from that fine, and whether there's any issues around that. So, for example, in Spain, that goes directly to the data commissioner, that fine.
Right.
Whereas in most other European countries, it actually go into Treasury, and then they'll
Yeah.
decide how that's
So it
best
goes
spent.
to the country's
Yeah.
treasury.
But the big thing is that the UK was probably one of the early adopters,
Yeah.
and because of Brexit, they needed to make some decisions, so they quickly adopted it in time and put it into the Data Protection Act 2018
Yeah.
on the same day that GDPR came into force, which was in May this year. But I would say that the data commissioners in each country have varied in terms of their carrot and stick. So the carrot is, we're here to help you, and that we will provide lots of tools. So if you look in each of those EU member states, they've all got a data commissioner. They're called the supervisory authority under the legislation. So it's the ICO in the UK, and they really can't start finding everybody if everybody could turn around in a court of law and say, well, we didn't know. So they've had 2 years of building up to provide tools, risk assessments and education materials to help organisations from small micro businesses up to sort of public sector organisations. Okay.
So here's the scenario. I'm running a college over in Africa. We've got 2,000 students. Half those students sort of come across the UK, and I've read about this law called EU GDPR, and we're trying to take it seriously. What positions do we need in the company? What job roles should there be? You know, I've sort of read in the EU GDPR material about data protection officers. Are they the same thing, or are they different to a chief information officer? What job roles do you see moving forward that all companies of a reasonable size have to have?
A good question, Richard, because up till the recent GDPR and other countries' data protection regulations, they've sort of shoehorned it into the IT arena, along with, as you said, the CIO role or a CTO role or Chief Security Officer role. But really, it needs to belong in the boardroom. And that's the good thing about GDPR, that it's risk, and therefore it's the board that are responsible. And I'll come back later on to say actually there are potential criminal convictions as well that you could be given. But they have stipulated that certain organisations have to have a data protection officer. That's somebody that's independent and objective, and is almost a dotted line to a data commissioner. And they're there in an advisory and guidance role to keep the organisation on track with regard to privacy and protecting the rights of the customers and all the stakeholders involved with the organisation. So to pick up on the criminal convictions, if an organisation is up in the 4% fine level and they have really been negligent, they could potentially get a criminal conviction for corporate negligence as well. So that is the bit that's actually got the concentration of the board, because they realise that that's proper risk and not something that they can swipe over to the IT department.
We were smiling because as we're filming, a police siren goes past when we talk about criminal convictions.
I know, that was perfect timing.
We didn't plan that.
No.
And I mean, a similar question, but for these, you know, the last few months here, we're filming. We've seen in the news that two companies have become $1 trillion a year companies. They are Amazon and Google. You know, we're in very, very exciting times for the tech industry. How do you organise this at a $1 trillion company level? How do you do?
How do you organise it in terms of the data protection?
Yeah, I mean, how do you plan for the GDPR? Is it teams of people? Is it one country?
They've had 2 years. This is the thing that people forget. Everyone's had 2 years to prepare for it. And actually, most data commissioners are being fairly realistic and saying, you know, 25th of May, we're only just beginning. And as long as you've got a roadmap and you can demonstrate that you are trying your best to be as closely aligned with GDPR as possible, then they'll work with you. But in terms of the big American tech vendors, the super organisations, they have realised already, because of interactions with the EU, that they actually need a base here. They actually need to think about where the data's stored. So most of them have got robust organisations and data storage facilities within the EU, and they actually ring fencing the data that belongs to EU residents.
And are you, when you're going out consulting, you talked a little about third parties, but of course, I mean, a lot of the hacking attacks we see are happening through suppliers and the supply chain. You know, you look at the Target one a few years ago, I think, was through sort of the heating and ventilation system, where they were able to get into the, ultimately, was the cash transactions going on Christmas Eve. So time and time again, we read about this. Does the cloud, does the Internet of Things, mobile devices that we're all using now, does that massively complicate EU GDPR, or are we making something very, very simple, making it complicated?
No, good question that is, Richard, because actually the Internet of Things is making the whole information security arena much more difficult. There's a couple of very good case studies that we can talk about. So you're right, with Target, it was the air conditioning engineer. That's how he got in. A really good one recently, and that was a casino that had a lot of money stolen.
Well, not good, but yeah.
Well, no, it was a good example, yeah. But you know how they got in? They got in through the thermometer in the fish tank.
Really?
So it was connected.
Don't have fish tank.
Yes. So that's a good example of, which we'll come back to in a minute, security and privacy by design. They're all add-ons rather than that. And the other one's a university. They got in to the whole system by coming in through the vending machine.
Right.
So everybody's getting excited about the Internet of Things and joining everything up. And wouldn't it be wonderful from our smartphone if we can control everything?
Yeah.
Now, before we get home, our heating's on, our fridge is reordering things.
So cooling up the beer and everything like that.
And
of
the
course,
frying pan's warming up, but actually it's more and more opportunities to intercept.
yeah.
And I know you wanted to ask me, you mentioned earlier about privacy by design, security by
That's my
design.
next question. Yes.
Yeah. So increasingly we've got pressure on the startup companies that are developing these fantastic apps
Yeah.
that will work on the Internet of Things, and they having the margin squeezed out of this development. So security, and with security goes privacy, therefore, if it's not secure, is an afterthought. So it's bolted on top. And as you can imagine, that if it's an afterthought, then it's not actually embedded in the app, and therefore it's quite susceptible for being intercepted.
Just final question. DPIA. Say I'm really busy and I'm new to my job and I don't know where to start. Where can I find a good template for DPIA?
If you're in the UK, the ICO's website, same in most of the European countries, they've got some fantastic assessment tools, DPIA examples, privacy notices, cookie policies, probably most of the things, and they apply for even micro businesses.
Yeah.
So the ICO, more than 2 years before GDPR came in, they produced their 12 steps for getting ready for GDPR.
Yeah.
And that's a really good guide. And actually, guess what? If they came calling and wanted to see how you were doing, or you've had a breach and you have to call them in, then the first thing they're going to ask you is, show me how you are against the 12 steps and how you prepared for it.
Yeah. Good. Carolyn Harrison, thank you very much for your time, and we hope you enjoyed the video here from London.